Also want to be respectful.
I know Dr. Kennedy was giving out extra credit for coming to this and emailing him about it. So more people should be here if they care about their grades.
And we have a test.
And we have a test tomorrow. It's supposed to be one of his more hellish exams.
Oh, really? What's it over?
It's just like the beginning stuff for biological anthropology, but it's the only part of the entire class that has math on the exam. And it's not a real math heavy class, and so people struggle on it the most.
All right, well, hopefully a couple more will come from there. We'll give you one more minute and get started.
How are you feeling about the exam tomorrow?
Did you go to the study thing last night?
I was at a different thing.
Okay. Well, I don't think it's gonna be that bad.
I also don't feel like it's gonna be that bad, but then I also,
But then people are like freaking out.
yeah, I feel like I'm either going to overstudy and be overprepared and mad at myself for stressing out about it, or I'm going to understudy and be mad at my grade.
Or I'm gonna like overthink it. That's my thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, I knew that. Oh, he told us yesterday the study thing that the people that were on the study guide was matching. So I'm like, okay, I can figure that out by like
This feels like a conference talk, huh, Scott? This conference talk, this would be a pretty good crowd. That's true. Wow, 10, this is amazing. I guess I'll just look at it from that perspective. All right, let's get started.
All right.
So, thanks folks for coming out. I appreciate you being here. Thursday afternoon, 4 is not an ideal time. I know we're all busy, so I appreciate you coming here and spending some time to listen. And as it says, hopefully participating, interacting. So, and I also want to thank BSA, Black Student Association, for the invitation to give a talk. I'm really happy to do it. So, we're going to start off just with a little bit of an icebreaker. This is why we have to be sitting close to each other. So I want you to talk to a neighbor and talk to them about what's an example of a positive community that you're a part of and what makes it meaningful to you. It can be anything, but let's just talk with a partner, group of 3 for a minute or two, and then hear from a few folks that want to share. A positive community that you're a part of and what makes it meaningful.
What was he saying?
I mean, I don't know. I'm involved in a lot of queer community groups, which has been really positive. I didn't have a lot of empathy growing up, so it's been really positive for me.
Did you read it?
Yes, I did.
Really good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's really good.
I noticed that because
I know it's just been getting gradually shorter over the past couple of days. Yeah, no, it's pretty who sits next to me is like,
that's
just every time I see you, you're like, what's your preference?
Yeah, as a
Yeah, I think I'm gonna keep it like this.
I like it.
Thank you.
You remind me of you. Right.
Okay, I'm
I don't know
Luca.
What is it?
I'm Luca.
Okay.
I did know that. Yeah.
I think it's funny to do both. I would say
It is.
community group.
Fun thing.
Just because it's like people that we all have like
Which
to drive together at the same time, just like a positive experience. And then I would also say adventures is a really positive, just because like even if you're showing they can sometimes set people that they can like
I think you guys come up and join us for introductory activity. So, no back row people.
I have a growing up, and about positive kind of dynamic. Because like my teenager is that's some of their best friends.
It can't be like that. It can be anything.
it's just like a weird
Like he said, it's friend group, like one of the groups you went to school with.
Yeah, it's shared. Yeah, literally, yeah. Your jobs are the exact same way.
The fellow.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just
Well, I have a book club that I'm also part of here that's all faculty and staff.
All right.
There's not a day that you go.
Less.
We have a shared interest of Stephen King. So that would be one.
Okay.
Well, right now we are, because we're reading the Dark
Okay.
series, so
They
we're in book 5.
That's really cool.
personal and that I want to like all over there.
Like,
So it's like
you're having to
like
choose
you should
How are we doing?
Friends with.
And then we
Be
moved
a
to
part of
facility.
something.
Yeah,
We just go all over the place.
just love of reading, I think, is always a good group.
I think so too.
So how you doing? You enjoyed it?
Yeah, there's temples and everything.
That was, yeah, no, that is great. But it'll be interesting. And then.
All right, I was eavesdropping. I heard lots of nice snippets of conversation. So does anybody want to share what you talked about with your little group or your partner with everyone? Community that you're a part of and what makes it positive for you?
I'm in the Rotary Club of Batesville. I serve as the president-elect. I'll take over in the summer. And we do, our first problem is nobody knows what Rotary is and what it does, and it's like really old for the most part. We definitely need like young members to be a part of Rotary Club. But nationally or internationally, Rotary Club is about fresh drinking water and eradication of polio. So that's a big, huge thing that we do. We raise money for those efforts. And then locally, we do the Angel Tree, which we'll be renaming that this Christmas because we got a cease and desist to stop using Angel Tree because the Salvation Army uses it in a prison or something. I don't know, but whatever. So new name coming. We do third grade dictionaries for all third graders in our county plus Cave City. We give them old-fashioned dictionaries. You don't need an internet connection. You just get on there and check things out. And we do scholarships for area high school students, including Cave City, that are college bound.
Great, thank you, Tommy. And those activities in and of themselves are what could make it a meaningful.
Absolutely, it's about the service. The motto is service above self.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else? Go for it, Luca.
Ryan and I talked about a couple different things. I talked about the LGBT groups in Spectra on campus and then groups in the surrounding, like Independence County area. And those are meaningful for me because I never really got to have like queer community growing up. And also finding ways to kind of assist people who were in the space I was a couple years ago. And then
Yeah, and then I just talked about it's kind of funny, but I said like being a part of a sports team and like having that shared suffering of like, man, you know. But I mean, it grows you a bond that like you can't explain to anybody else except for the people that were a part of it. So.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? One or two more?
So mine's kind of funny. I started an alumni book club during COVID. It was just trying to keep people connected to the college and to each other. But we're still meeting and we've become so close that we've actually met in person twice and went to an ELO concert in Chicago. And it's really cool, but we do things too that, so they wanted to honor Terrell Tebbets because he comes in and moderates our group sometimes. And so they made a really meaningful contribution to his domestic travel fund. So it's really been a way to like keep them connected with each other and with the college. But it's been rewarding for me because a large number of us were in school at the same time, but I wasn't engaged on campus. I was married. I was living off campus. And so now I've gotten really close with these people I was in school with, but didn't really know them at the time. It's been really neat.
Thanks, Cindy. Keisha, say again.
I was gonna say, I just graduated from USF a couple of months ago, so being in grad school and the shared suffering and those kind of really pushed us into being the community that we were. And especially we also worked on meaningful research as a part of, public health program and stuff. So there was some impactful projects we did and, cancer research and other things. So I think that kind of inspired us to like transition into different roles that we are in right now, whether we are continuing our education or working. So that's been something that we did as a community.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for sharing. Hey, I wanted to start off with that not just because the talk is supposed to be interactive and it's also called Chaos or Community, but because even though Dr. King is often primarily known as a civil rights icon today, I think it's equally important to recognize that civil rights are just one part of this sort of community that he worked to foster across all different sorts of groups and ideas and forms of inequality that he saw during his lifetime. So, in 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. isolated himself from the demands of the civil rights movement and rented a house in Jamaica to work on what would be his final manuscript entitled, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? In it, Dr. King examines two main themes. The first is a critical assessment of the civil rights movement. He discusses the legislative victories that they achieved, primarily the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which basically outlaws discrimination, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which outlawed literacy tests, among other things, and allowed for large numbers of African Americans, primarily in the South, to become registered and to vote in the United States. These initial struggles against discrimination, brutality, and outright racism, however, were only the first steps towards achieving equality. Dr. King's vision demanded much more than laws that made segregation and discrimination illegal. He advocated for legal, social, economic, and moral striving towards true brotherhood and sisterhood among equals. To achieve this vision would require both government support and personal commitment. In the second part of the book, Dr. King turns his attention to what he calls the World House. Here he links the specific struggle for freedom among African Americans in the United States to independence movements that were occurring around the world against colonialism, basically movements and revolutions for independence, primarily occurring at this point in Africa and in Asia. The revolutionary spirit of freedom and equality that was sweeping across the globe, he viewed as a direct line with what was happening in the United States. And much like the domestic politics in the United States, we could stand for and promote freedom and justice, or we could stand against them in favor of the status quo that was built on racism, exploitation, and inequality. And like his emphasis on the US, he was not only concerned with formal legal equality, rather for equality of opportunity that wasn't crippled by poverty, war, or injustice. To read or to listen to Dr. King's words, it's clear that his goals are expansive. They're not narrow or programmatic or focused on achieving any one particular thing. For me, his approach to the complex, interrelated problems of racism, poverty, inequality, and war of his time, and I would also say of our time, can be summed up by a short phrase. Peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. This phrase sums up Dr. King's perspective, his way of life, and his moral commitments. Freedom is the means to freedom. Love is the means to love. Equality is the means to equality, and nonviolence is the means to nonviolence. For Dr. King, the means and the ends could not be separated. The manner in which we live is the answer to why we live. Dr. King's vision of a good society demands as much as the individual as it does of society itself. For self and society, there's a path that leads to community. It is the path of joy, love, inclusion, and commitment. There's also a path that descends into chaos. It is the path of hate, of fear, of exclusion, and of evasion. Dr. King's vision intertwines tremendous responsibility for the individual as well as for society. Each individual has the responsibility to cultivate and live by a high moral and ethical standard. It's the moral standard of Jesus, to turn the other cheek when faced with injustice, not because one is weak, but because one who suffers without striking back is physically, mentally, and spiritually superior to one who strikes. Dr. King promoted a genuine ethos of love thy neighbor, not a love that's shallow or sentimental, but a love that sees each human being as equal, whose freedom and equality are intertwined with one's own. Love desires for everyone to be free. It's that sort of love that prompted King to write in his letter from Birmingham jail in 1963, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Or as he states more poetically in Chaos or Community, deeply woven into the fiber of our religious tradition is the conviction that men are made in the image of God, and they are the souls of infinite metaphysical value. If we accept this as a profound moral fact, we cannot be content to see men angry, to see men victimized with ill health when we have the means to help them. Beyond individual responsibility, society has a double duty. First, it's responsible for promoting laws and institutions that foster equality. Second, and even more important since we live in a democracy in which the people's will gives legitimacy to the government, society has the responsibility to foster education and values which allow for individual growth and ethical character. If society doesn't foster individuals who are ethical, empathetic, respectful, and believe deeply in equality, then laws will ultimately fall short. In Chaos or Community, Dr. King outlines his most potent statement of where we stood as a country in the mid-1960s and where we might end up. I'm not the most qualified person to talk on Dr. King's legacy, nor do I wish to be provocative or hyperbolic in choosing this as a title for today's talk. Nonetheless, as events happening in the US and around the world make clear, there's a path to community and there's a path that leads to chaos. I'm deeply concerned about the direction that our country is headed, and as the most powerful country on earth, the direction in which we may be influencing the rest of the world. What I'd like now is for each of us, either individually or ideally with maybe individually for a minute to think on your own, but in those same small groups or with someone around you, to talk about where you see community and where you see chaos being cultivated in the world. You can be any scale you wish. It can be your own family, your own local community, the state, the country, or international. You're welcome to focus on anything that is relevant or on your mind. There's lots. I mean, when I was thinking of things to prepare for this, sort of like, well, there's too many things to choose from right now as far as these ideas of, in particular, what I would call chaos being fostered and a lack of community. You're welcome to think on anything. If you want a little more guidance, sort of three themes that stuck out to me and are really prominent through Dr. King's work is racism and discrimination against any group of people, poverty and economic exploitation, and warfare and imperialism. But I would just ask you all to think of positive or negative examples of where you see this type of world being fostered today.
And this is too easy.
Yeah, well, knock it out of the park, Cindy.
I mean, chaos is every night on the news.
1600 national politics.
You gotta join the group.
What's happening with like ICE specifically.
Speeding here. I have to go to the doctor.
So like horrible violence because people like get tests.
Do anything to get me.
It's probably a dog. It's been a weird day for you. Yeah, it's just a weird day. Like it's my feeling.
I try to, just to protect your own mental health, you can't look out encouraged by some of the
And how
many victories that we're seeing. Pushing back. Yeah, small.
and I think
And then in your face, more being part of this. So, like, for instance, there's been a lot of, we were trying to canvas.
That's fine, you're right.
And sort of like, yeah, so making sure that they recognize.
yeah.
Community and like.
Anyways, that's the way I protect them. And I don't have cable. I didn't see
DSA is always having to go to each one to make sure. So it's just name.
we're not having
is
their-
yeah.
We had a new all these like scratched to be treated a certain way.
Yeah.
Yeah. All I've seen is the screenshots. I refuse to watch the.
It's just ridiculous. That's all.
The people in the video said, you can't.
But I don't think they're fair.
I mean, whatever her name is.
They don't.
Okay, that's what I figured.
Well, and you know, the thing is why I was, because you know, media literacy is weird. So
I try to go to
you always have to think about what creates this message. What's the purpose of what is it trying to do? And most of the time, I
One,
think
they got it, one, they can like, she got it, distraction.
But you did take that word out of my
talking about the things being, yeah.
What's insane, a lot of things. It's fantastic. You know, seeing, you know, and just more distractions out.
Like going from an HBCU, such a big HBCU.
Before it was just like that was enslaved. It just come by easy. Like now there's like two years back on that. We don't wanna go. What did you say? I started to
I just live in
She's
Yeah, I was taking classes on
you know. But you even just. I read you, I wouldn't even.
He's taken back to school. Everybody has their own opinions, like it makes sense a little bit.
Yes.
Started college.
Trying to get around.
All of it.
Okay.
So you've been in small schools.
Yeah.
She goes, ha, like she's you know what? I'm gonna try to keep my options open. That's good.
I asked them in grad school, I was remote, so I never played you.
No, you know what? Intro class.
How you're.
Looks nice.
Yeah.
It's actually, I walked by it and it's stand research field.
It's a cool building.
All right,
Neat
so
stuff.
let's just start us off. Let's hear from some folks.
Yeah, you're this movie, yeah.
We kind of talked about, like, our first example was kind of the United States watching what's happening with ICE right now, Minnesota specifically, and them being kind of like agents of chaos in the US, but also talking about like the protests as an example of community and thinking of all the videos I've seen of people singing songs and, you know, the ICE out like in front of the hotels at 4 a.m, like that kind of things, and people really unifying around this issue.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great, thanks.
That's a great point, because I kind of forgot about that. We were talking about like every example of chaos we feel like comes back to the same place right now. But there was a very remarkable, peaceful resistance in Minnesota. And I think they were successful. Didn't they start withdrawing? So
Allegedly.
Absolutely. Other folks.
Venezuelan oil. Let's go get it. It's not even good oil, but let's go get it again. Let's blockade the coasts. I was telling Amanda, let's just do Golden Rule, reverse it. If you're not religious, reverse it. We blockade. Someone blockades the West Coast and the East Coast. We can't get any goods in or out. We're suffocating as an economy. Someone invades, and I'm not even a fan of the president currently, but a president of a country should not be kidnapped from their home with the first lady and then thrown into prison in the other country where they're going to get a fair trial. If someone did that to Trump, that would be an act of war, and we should, meet that with something. So I just feel like that's chaotic.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, on the international front, there are so many things that we could point to. Like, I mean, essentially kidnapping of Maduro is just sort of like one of the most clear, but this idea that for all the problems that the international system has had for decades, there's some more or less rules to it, right? Sovereignty being a pretty basic one of those, right? Where countries more or less manage their own affairs, right? So the idea that the United States can just simply invade and kidnap a leader of a different sovereign nation is clearly a recipe for chaos. What else? What else did folks talk about?
We talked about there's almost like daily chaos introduced that is distraction. It's chaos used to distract.
Did you know they repealed part of the clean air stuff this week?
Mm-hmm.
Half of us don't, I'm sure, because we're too busy with all the different things that are going on. That I just heard an article or a report over lunch that said, perhaps the air quality you breathe is directly related to Alzheimer's. So if you've been breathing really bad air for a while, that could trigger it. If that's true, we're just taking a step backwards. I think Tom Cotton put a Facebook post out saying, we're freeing the companies to be able to do stuff. And it's like, oh, okay, so you're going to use that. It's an economic boon for some, but it's going to hurt us all.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think biggest point of that was when I was graduating in January and, like the president's election had just happened and the federal cuts happened and a lot of research was seized and a lot of people had worked on it for a lot longer than, his term or his prior president term, and how that was seized in between and how we're taking a step back in terms of like research and other things was also just baffling.
Absolutely. I mean, to tie a couple of those ideas together, a good place to look beyond sort of the distractions of the chaos is always at the money, right? Like what's happening financially. And I'm sure we've all heard about the boon to ICE and the Department of Homeland Security more broadly, right? Where we spend our money is a reflection of our values. And when we decide that we're going to commit over $80 billion to ICE to be spent in the next 4 years at maximum, it could be spent sooner. We could get more to that. And at the same time, we're cutting cancer research, we're cutting NIH research, we're cutting NSF research, we're cutting SNAP benefits, we're cutting healthcare, we're cutting IRS so that they can get to people who are evading taxes. We're cutting nearly everything related to education and social services at the United States, while we have seemingly unlimited funds to release these sorts of forces like ICE that it's tough to see their role as anything but creating chaos. When you bring a police force that has essentially zero accountability into our cities against the will of the local officials there, I don't know what else you can call that besides like pretty deliberate chaos. We got money for that, but we don't have.
And only in Blue City.
Yeah.
That's chaotic. It's not even fair. They're not meeting it out across the board. Any place they think needs help, it's just the blue places that need this infusion.
Well, in contrast that, which one of the places where we cut funding that you didn't mention that troubles me deeply is, and this goes back to this idea of community, but we're talking about global community, and that's USAID. And the fact that we have people in the world that are dying because of that chaos. And so I tie it to, our values and where our priorities are. And it's not just blue cities, it's also brown people, right? Because the bulk of the people that are being hurt by that are people that are in countries that don't have anything else but what the United States was helping them with. So that's the chaos piece that I'm connecting it to what you're saying, so.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was reading about that actually earlier, it said something like probably 95 million people around the world are being affected by US aid in particular being cut, but other state programs and other sort of ideas of ways that the United States, and even taking sort of a realist approach to it, right? You know, some people might say, well, why are we trying to solve the world's problems? Well, sure, we're providing these things that are helping people, but at the same time, it's a way of exercising our own soft power, right? The United States has the ability, when we're doing things like USAID and others, to take the sort of moral high ground as a beacon of democracy, as a beacon of these other things. When we just slash that and at the same time pull out of most elements of the United Nations climate treaties, we're essentially evacuating any sort of responsibility or high ground or ability to say that this is a way that we think the world should go that promotes freedom or democracy or prosperity or any of the other key words that we've been attempting to at least theoretically promote since after World War II. All of that's gone. And I mean, the message is quite clear to the rest of the world.
One thought about all the chaos as a way to help the community toward the future is keeping a record of what's happening, both to find out what needs to be fixed or considered again in the future, but also in terms of accountability. Any kind of historical example I can think of, whether it's kind of like reuniting of people because of past violence, it has to involve with admitting what's happened. I'm thinking like the Truth and Reconciliation Committee in South Africa. Like we have to collect the facts, and so if we feel exhausted by all of it, just at least know where those facts are being kept and reported accurately for the future, so we don't feel just exhausted. So you don't have to always be aware of it, but having records, I think, is important for the present moment.
Yeah, that's a good point because it's very exhausting when you know what the truth is, but something else is being reported as truth. And you saw it and you know that's not true, but it's being presented as truth. That's very chaotic and exhausting.
Absolutely. And just to follow up on that point a little bit, I mean, a lot of these things that are happening in terms, sort of politically and economically are one really major element to be aware of. But like, as you're both pointing to, all of this has a sort of ideological cover to it, right? At the same time that these are happening, these sorts of things are happening, there's also a really deliberate attempt to rewrite what's happening. I mean, we can see that, to me, I would say in sort of, you could pick up any number of examples, but we see it incredibly clearly through the discussion around January 6th. I don't know if anybody has visited the official White House J6 page. It's horrifying. It is just a string of lies that says that these people were patriots. I mean, in addition to Trump pardoning essentially all of those individuals, it's just a total recasting of what happened as not an attempt to overturn a legitimate election, but as a group of patriots who became political pawns of Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party and suffered and were imprisoned because of that. I mean, that's one really clear example. And the other, going along with this historical narrative part that Scott is saying, the importance of remembering and collecting in these facts, is everything that has to do with essentially race, gender, and sexuality, right? The directives towards obviously the national parks, but many other agencies about quite literally what can be talked about, what can be shown. And these, I actually wrote down one from one of the early executive orders in which SO 3431, Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, in which it states that The department should take action as appropriate and consistent with applicable law to ensure that all public monuments, memorials, statues, markers, and similar properties within the department's jurisdiction do not contain descriptions, depictions, or other content that inappropriately disparage Americans past or living, including persons living in colonial times, and instead focus on the greatness of the achievements and progress of the American people, or with respect to natural features, the beauty, abundance, and grandeur of the American landscape. I mean, the sort of double speak that's going on there, that we can only talk about positive things in our history. Well, I mean, I don't think you have to be particularly open-minded to recognize that the United States has a ton of positive, important things that have happened in its history and a ton of really negative, brutal ones. To say that literally we're only going to remember the positive, and to not just say that as an individual, to have the power to affect the way that museums, public monuments, parks display our historical narrative is a tremendous amount of power. And there's community and the people that have resisted that and have sort of not sort of immediately buckled at those sorts of directives or threats. But for every one of those, there's others that have, or others that have even taken the additional step of pulling a talk on race or ethnicity, shutting a DEI program before it's even forced to be closed, taking a class on that was going to be offered on gender or race off the books before it could even happen to be sort of questioned, right? Or removing these things in order to not try and, I don't know, get on the radar or run afoul of the sort of ideological narrative regarding that.
I think that was point one, letter from Birmingham jail when King was talking about the four steps you take before you go into protest.
Yeah.
Right. Collection of facts. That's the first one.
Good. That's a perfect segue. Thank you. We coordinated this. So, I know obviously, there's a lot of really negative things going on in our country, and those affect each of us in different ways, right? Some of us feel like that we are much more in the direct crosshairs of some of the things that are going on. I mean, it's no secret that a lot of the directives are aimed at people of color, women, immigrants, people who don't speak English as their first language, people in the LGBT community. All of those don't fall on me. I don't have the fear of someone, even if I was speaking Spanish on the street, I don't have the fear of ICE asking me to see my passport, right? But the fact is that these directives come down on different people in different ways. So what I want to do is, talking about this is important, right? Sort of collecting the facts, knowing what's going on. And I would say even having a space to talk about these things that are happening in our country where we can share what we feel, what's worrying to us, what actually is a positive community that we see. But as Dr. Williams is pushing towards, right, in Letter from Birmingham Jail, Dr. King lays out these 4 steps of a nonviolent campaign. And the first is collecting of facts, basically demonstrating, is there some form of inequality, discrimination, exploitation happening? That's the first step. And hopefully we can continue moving through those beyond just sort of thinking, this is scary and bad. What happens next? Does anybody remember what was the second step of that? Negotiation. You're trying to say, hey, quit oppressing these people. Do something better. We don't want this. Whether that's our local leaders, our senators, our congressmen, the president, whoever it is, some sort of attempt to, or even sort of thinking more locally here within Lyon or in Batesville or whatever, trying to say this is the problem, this individual, either people who are perpetrating those inequalities or supporting them, because there's obviously lots of people who support without perhaps directly being the purveyors of those having a good faith attempt to try and change those things. The third step in Dr. King's idea of a nonviolent campaign is, I think he essentially says purification, spiritual purification. Right? I mean, going back to what Luca mentioned that's happening in Minneapolis, right? We're not in the 50s or 60s in the United States, but there's real violence that's happening today in our country, right? And even speaking out about it can unfortunately bring some of that down. So this idea of spiritual purification regarding a nonviolent campaign is that a person making themselves ready to respond with nonviolence, even when violence is what's offered, right? The people who are protesting in Minneapolis or elsewhere need an incredible amount of strength to be out there, to be facing down people in body armor with automatic weapons, right? And then after that, the last step is what he calls direct action, right? So if none of these other things, people don't listen, if there's no change that's happening through this negotiation and through the other elements, then he says what people are left with is direct action, which means a boycott, it means a protest, it means doing something direct in order to create what he essentially calls a nonviolent creative tension. Basically, the people in power, according to Dr. King, are not going to cede power willingly. Something needs to happen to shake them out of the status quo, right? And again, I think we don't learn enough about Dr. King or about nonviolence in general in our society, that it can often be like viewed as just sort of like passivity or a weakness, right? Like, this is a bad thing and I'm not going to do anything about it. His answer is exactly the opposite. It's that actually you are doing a tremendous amount about this. You're sort of countering this force with a different kind of force, a nonviolent one that aims to sort of break us out of this inertia of the status quo. It's always easier to do nothing than to do something and to push forward for some type of change. What I want to ask the last thing is for us to chat again with our partners and friends about where we're at in that process, right? The process of collecting facts. Are we still learning about if and what the inequality is? Are we trying to negotiate? Whatever that means, right? I'm not a great person at this, but some of that negotiation just at a very minimal level is emailing and calling Tom Cotton. I know not a whole lot is going to change, but enough constituents do it, maybe he listens, probably not. But that sort of idea of negotiation, telling the people that I don't support this, right? I don't support this and something needs to be different. Brandon.
Not to give excuses for our state representatives, but Trio has been a big target. It's a little scary between August and September because we didn't have our grant. And so Lyon was kind of floating us along until we got the okay that we would have it. But I reached out and I was like, hey, and like, I'm the state president for Trio, and so they know my name. And so Robert was like, why are these people calling me? I said, what do you mean? And he was like, what is going on? Some of them don't have any idea how much this is affecting other people. He was like, can you get a call together real quick so we can talk and figure out what we need to do? And I was like, dude, people are losing their jobs. Like, we don't really have a lot going on according to you all. He was like, no. He was like, tell me so I can tell him, like, this is happening right now. And so it's been a thing of Trump saying that Trio is a relic of the past. So people that have low income, first gen, they don't need help going to college. And so it's been a thing of when. And they've always felt like Trio is a Black people program or a minority program. I have more white kids in my Trio program than any other program. And people are like, oh, you got white kids? Yes, a lot. There were barely any Black or brown kids when I got here, and someone said to me, they don't speak English. I said, no, Black people speak English. So what are you saying? They just weren't recruiting them. But we've done better since I've been here about that because it's important for parents to feel safe sending their kids to a program that doesn't look like them. But at the same time, it's kind of like calling helps. As little as you think it does, or sending an email, it helps. You know, we have to use our private emails. Of course, I have a state email for my Trio stuff, but we have to send emails and have to call. I have to go there in March and say, hey, can you sign an agreement? Even though this budget has been already approved, we still gotta say, hey, can you sign appropriations so we can get our money? And Senator Bozeman sits on the appropriations committee for Trio. And I'm like, you don't be on TV like the rest of these people. You need to be on there telling me how much Trio has helped Arkansans. And he's like, yeah, you know, they don't ever Zoom on me. I said, sir, you don't ever raise your hand. And we sitting there looking at you because we watch it. And so I think it's just a matter of them not thinking about that. And it's an election year, so they really paying attention right now because they know their constituents, the people that are voting for you are the low income people, sir. The rich people probably voting for you too, but it's a lot of low income people in Arkansas and they're voting for you. And if their kids aren't able to do anything, because it's crazy how the people that are telling you don't need an education are the people with degrees. And I have to say that every time. The people saying, oh, you don't need a degree. These people already have education. They have degrees. So they really don't have a lane to stand in when it comes to your education. But it's one of those things where calling helps. We call all the time, you know, we're not supposed to get on our soapbox about private issues, but people do because there's so much going on and it's affecting so many people. Sorry.
Oh, no. So calling works.
Yeah, calling works. Send emails.
Yeah. All right, let's talk with the folks around us.
What's the prompt again?
Where are we in this process? Like, and basically, how do we move from thinking about and seeing all of these negative things to doing something about it? Whatever that doing means for you.
I was gonna say, are you asking about individual where we at, or are you talking about like where we at as a community right now?
I mean, I would say more personally, sort of, you know, we see a lot of the negative, but where does it lead?
I think like what we were talking about a while ago, it starts over every week. It almost feels like
I feel like I get in a constant
something new happens. You start step one all
every time it's, yeah, because I can't even remember what I was calling about last year. I just know there was something I was calling somebody in the government about moving. It was weird because I kept calling him so he would give you the voicemail for his car dealership.
It's like
There's a lot of lines. The first part, there was the
line readers that work in their office.
Yeah, I think the research that you already have, then the history is gone. So then you gotta start all over with research. Like you said.
Yeah.
It also feels like it's like maybe more black hole, like what is it?
Yes.
Like it's you find out about something and it's so much bigger than I thought it would be. But I did, right? Like I don't know. I'd rather see you not know. It feels bad. That's the thing.
She works there. Yeah.
Once you get
So I see her. Is he up there, Dimple?
it's very focused.
Be mindful.
I have to take like half a week off. So I think I'm
I tend to get stuck in
the 24-hour cycle.
like I have to force myself to get past that. And I just get like, I need information.
Oh my God, I
It's the action.
Yeah.
It's hard.
I'm exactly like you.
never
Learn everything I can.
The lights is like that aren't blinking.
but it's not like, hey, we need to do this to get over this.
Like was created.
I had this like moment of like, let's talk about the feminine thing. Like, it's all. And I've been so focused on the other things. So like, it's just and I'm seeing like it's actually 6 months old.
Good.
Everywhere.
Not a couple days ago.
Yeah.
people in power.
Right, and I'm
want us in the they come to my office, yes, and they come to my office and they're like, a lot more power than the father.
Sometimes it's just a matter of, I am not going to purchase that from you.
I mean, like, I'm voting. So recognize, like, they just want to say, I'm going to say, you know, and history and it's like, mine's like that. And it's like, hey, we got this. And then we make the same. And when the people that you bring, I think again, there's all the outsiders here.
Yeah, that's what's getting your foot through. You don't actually do it.
So I'm in there.
Yeah.
Which has been like 30 years.
So they do the research.
Yes,
It's just the way.
constantly got negotiations, it starts over with negotiations.
You get through the cycle. Right, yeah.
There's been a lot of damage for sure.
So I have a college does backstory, so it's especially back here, so. Yeah.
The word doesn't fit, right? But, you know,
You know, I know it's.
So if I want to share a little bit of what you talked about, where do we go from here? What do things look like?
We all feel like we're a little bit stuck in the fact finding
Yeah.
because there's just so much to try to learn and see
Feels like
what new horror has unfolded or.
Alternative facts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Alternative facts.
feels like we start over every week.
Yes, that's.
And I mean, I think a lot of that goes into the distraction model, right? This sort of deliberate deluge of things that you can't possibly stay up to date on everything. And it has the effect of sort of people, you know, I'm not saying that here, but just sort of like, it's too much. I'm going to check out. I can't, I don't want anything to do with this. And I mean, I've talked to, sort of in my own experience, I've talked to so many students, you know, and it blows my mind when I hear an 18 or 19-year-old say, I can't even remember what the context is, but they'll say like, I'm not into politics. I'm like, well, that's a shame because politics is into you. It is going to affect you whether you're into it or not, right? So, I mean, one thing is to not get overwhelmed, but the other is just like, well, what can we actually keep?
I feel like we're just in this constant negotiation phase, because then, like you say, we keep getting negotiated about the same thing, and then you don't get what you want, and then you move on to something else, and you still negotiate, and the same thing. You're continuously on a loop, going around in circles, constant, and then things change. So then you got to go find the facts again about this, try to negotiate, and then we do it all over again. So I don't even know if we're going to go past that negotiation phase.
And even things, you know, we'll see things come from Trump, from the executive, that Republicans in Congress sort of agree with the name, but then when we see new budgets come around, like, oh, actually, we do want to support those things, right? So there's this internal negotiation.
Right.
None of them have the spine or bravery to like outwardly say, you know, actually here in Arkansas, we really would like our PBS station, PBS and NPR. Those do a really valuable service. You know, they might not say that, but some actually do believe those things, or they believe in the TRIO program, and they believe in these things even when Trump does not. Yeah. What else do folks discuss?
I think it's really hard to be hopeful in this kind of environment. I think it's really hard to feel like you're making any progress. And I think everybody's nodding right now. I think that's kind of what all of the groups came to, right? Like I'm in mutual aid groups, and we talk about protests, and we send out protest safety, and like parts of our group were at the No Kings protest in Batesville and in Jonesboro. And we talk about ways that we can help each other, but it feels like those things are so small. Like it feels like a drop, like, and you know intellectually that those things are important, but it feels like a drop in a bucket, and it's really hard to think of those things as important. And it's like the fact finding and the negotiations are all consuming. It's really hard to think of like me going and spending an afternoon at a protest as being impactful.
I think that was the point I was trying to make with our little group, was the fact that I think there's a lot of information that tries to convince us that we don't have power, right? That we don't have, the things that we're doing is too small, we're not going to make a difference. Or us protesting or boycotting a company because of the connections that they have made or the things that they're doing, that's not going to mean anything to those big companies. But I think it's a mismessage, right? I don't think it's a real, because we do have power. We've seen it. We've seen in Minneapolis, we've seen examples of where a group of people, a community can actually make a difference. And so I think if we try to get past that, like feeling like I'm too small, I'm not making a difference, then I think we'll have more movement toward the action piece of what Keith was talking about.
So, I think there are lots of, I mean, just because it's sort of more contemporary, I mean, there's a lot of thinking about Minneapolis, but there have been so many points where Trump's actually been defeated. He is a megalomaniac, so he'll never say that I've been defeated or I'm sorry or I was wrong. But when artists pull out of the Kennedy Center, what does he do? He closed it, right? Rather than like facing a skeleton lineup because artists don't want to perform at his newly renamed Trump Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. You know, they pulled out, and he's going to pitch that as a win on his own terms. You know, it was decrepit. We're going to remodel it. It's going to come back better than ever. That's a victory, right? You don't get to just put your name on this and control what arts look like in the United States and then take all the credit for it. He had to close it because people didn't want to perform there. I think there's lots of examples like that, lots of things where people have stood up and he's realized, actually, I don't have the strength to do this. There's a lot of bluster and there's a lot of bullying, and clearly he does have a lot of power, but there have been many instances, even if we look at tariffs in a lot of ways, where people stand up and he realizes that everyone's not just going to like lie down and let him take the win on everything. So I think, and sort of along that for the last part too, you know, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed, but I think we also often try to, you know, sort of want to have this solution to some sort of big problem at the end, right? You know, we need victories along the way. And I mean, I think that's an important part of what Dr. King talks about in that book. The victories of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act are really important victories along the way. But those victories didn't fundamentally change the whole thing, right? It's still just like, well, keep doing what you've been doing, keep making community, keep organizing, keep taking care of other people and taking care of yourself and figuring out what's the next step. At least that's sort of, to me, the message of like, you know, I guess that was what sort of I was trying to say earlier with that, the relationship between the means and the end, right? If you're actually trying to foster a community of nonviolence and love, then sure, you want to get essentially military forces of ICE out of places. You want to achieve those short goals, but at the same time, like actually creating a society where people care about each other and take care of each other, and where we spend our money reflects our values. Those are, you know, I would say, the longer term ones that don't just get achieved overnight or in a short term. Other thoughts from folks about how things look moving forward? Last one.
What you brought up kind of reminded me of one thing that's really been on my heart lately, which, coming from a queer rights perspective, for most people, the only queer rights victory they know about is Stonewall. They know about Stonewall and the legalization of gay marriage. And when we're talking about like fact finding and like, you know, the alternative facts kind of sphere, Stonewall was a fundamentally transgender, like active community. Like Marsha P. Johnston, like very famously, was present and active transgender woman. and a vital member of that community. But the word transgender has been erased from the Stonewall National Park. And so having people not only have their identity erased from a very important monument, but the only monument that most people know about queer rights. People think of gay people and victories, and they think of Stonewall, and they think of like the AIDS crisis, and that's what we have, and it's getting taken away from us.
Other final thoughts? Yeah, Nisha.
I think, when we were talking about just having this change and going to the protests and, I think it is easy to feel overwhelmed because, when you go into these take an action and you don't see a change immediately, it's always overwhelming. But I think if you shift the perspective into thinking I'm instigating a change, it snowballs into actually, seeing a result in the long term and just not feeling overwhelmed at this point. So.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone so much for attending and for sharing your perspectives. I really appreciate everything that people had to say about what you're concerned about and what you're doing to challenge it and to make things better. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
And thanks for letting me come a little late.
I had to talk with this group, but
I can do that, I'm used to that.
I'm
No, I was thinking about reading places. No, sorry. Yeah. And then Gasper even came back and said he's lying.
Is it?
And he's got the proof that he